Hi guys, so I was doing a little bit of research and I shared a Google form on Twitter to get some insight from you guys on your interest and familiarity with different characters, specifically women in Greek mythology. That's not specifically what this video is about. It's actually a video inspired by one of the answers to one of those questions. There was also a question where you could write in that was, are there any women of Greek mythology, Greek and Roman mythology, that you would be interested in hearing more about? Now, someone answered that question with, no, I'm more interested in history in the literal and real sense. And this video isn't a criticism of that person, but I thought that was a very interesting answer because from my perspective, mythology in ancient Greece and ancient Rome is very much literal and real history. Now, that's not to say Zeus was probably a real guy who fathered tons of different children by different women and Hercules actually slayed the Nemean lion. And over the past year I've actually had the opportunity to teach myth in a university setting with undergraduate students, and something I've really tried to enforce in my teaching of Greek myth is how relevant Greek myth is to the study of real Greek people. So what do I mean by that? There's actually a few different layers of meaning there. The two main ways I would say that mythology is a representation and source for real history is firstly that these gods, heroes, characters, whatever you want to call them, were part of Greek religious beliefs. And religion was a massive part of Greek life. I remember reading an article a while back that said something along the lines of women in ancient Greece spend about a third of the days in a year preparing for and celebrating Greek religious festivals. Atheism was not treated lightly in ancient Greece. It was not okay to question the reality of the gods, and a lot of Greek art, literature and culture was dependent on Greek mythology. The tragedies that we read and study and were performed and viewed in ancient Athens were adaptations of Greek myths and were part of religious festivals. The Olympic Games and other such games were part of religious celebrations. Most of the famous Greek buildings and pieces of architecture had religious significance. Many of them were temples, and a lot of Greek art prior to the Hellenistic period were equally a part of these religious areas and buildings. Apart from the fact that mythology played a very significant role in real Greek lives, the myths themselves are an incredibly important source for ancient historians. Now, studying antiquity is studying a period of time where a lot of evidence is missing and you're filling in a lot of gaps and piecing together puzzles. And one important piece of that puzzle is mythology and the stories of Greek gods and heroes. To ignore mythology completely as an ancient historian is to not do your job properly. But I think I can best express this through some examples. So one of my favourite examples of how mythology is a source of information for real life in ancient Greece is the myth of Ares' daughter who was sexually assaulted by Poseidon's son. Now, in this myth, as I said, Ares' daughter is sexually assaulted by Poseidon's son, and Ares walks in on this act taking place. So he kills Poseidon's son in defense of his daughter, and Poseidon's reaction to this is to take Ares to court for having murdered his son. Ares, on the other hand, defends his actions as what would be considered legal homicide that occurred within the remits of the law. Specifically, that a man could kill another man whom he found in the act of sexually assaulting or in fact committing adultery with a woman in his family. This myth actually is a source of information for a real Athenian law. In democratic Athens there was indeed a law of legal homicide that included these specific circumstances, and it's actually a law that we have really sporadic random bits of information for, and unfortunately we don't have an inscription or decree setting out exactly how this law worked in the courts. So we're piecing together bits of evidence from court speeches and other sources, including this myth. And one of the reasons we can use this myth as a source of information is because it is cited in Greek oratory. So Greek court speeches have used this myth themselves as evidence for the law and for the justice system in Athens. And if the Greeks saw ancient mythology as a fair representation of certain aspects of their lives, then it would be wrong for us as modern interpreters to say differently. Now, that's not to say that myth is stationary. There are multiple different versions of pretty much every single myth. This can vary because of time, because of genre in which the myth is appearing in, and because of location in different ancient Greek city-states and even into the Roman Empire, or even just the specific speaker themselves. So I would never tell you to take ancient Greek myth for granted and assume that that is how things were in ancient Greek reality, but it can, however, be a really significant source for Greek reality. Beyond things as specific as laws, it can reveal different attitudes towards different groups of people. It gives you an idea of where the Greeks thought that they came from. Another interesting example of mythology running alongside Greek reality is the myth of Pandora, who was in fact the first ever mortal woman created by the gods as a gift to the Titan Epimetheus in order to punish the Titan Prometheus, his brother. Along with Pandora came a pithos, or a jar, although most often remembered these days as a box, which contained all of the evils in the world as well as hope. So after Pandora's curiosity compels her to open this jar and set free all of the evils of the world, she manages to close the jar before Hope 2 escapes. And that is the silver lining of her opening the jar. What's interesting though is the word pithos in ancient Greek can also mean womb. And one of the scholarly interpretations of this myth is that in fact the jar is Pandora's womb, and what comes with women that didn't exist before? Children. Children represent death in the sense that we all age and cannot live forever. They also represent both a burden as well as hope for their fathers. In ancient Greek thought, the womb and childbirth were seen as polluted acts. So after a woman gave birth in ancient Greece, there was a certain period of time where strangers were not allowed to enter the home of this woman in case they too were infected by the pollution inherent in childbirth. So what we see in the myth of Pandora is a way that Greeks explain certain attitudes towards certain events in Greek life. I'm sure in many of the modern manifestations of myths that people come in contact with, they don't necessarily reflect the reality of Greek history or share that insight with you, but that's something that I think is incredibly important and actually is a major element of my PhD work. I personally am examining myth in a certain context to establish Athenian history. So I would love to know if this video has perhaps changed your perception of ancient Greek and Roman mythology, and if it's got you excited to learn a little bit more. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about ancient history, mythology and classical literature, I have many videos on the topic and I will link the playlist down below so you can check it out. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this video in the comments down below, and if you have a favourite myth, please do let me know as well. Until next time guys, happy reading and I'll see you all again soon. Bye!